Hello and welcome to GB News from ARC Conference. I'm Darren Grime and I'm joined today, I'm delighted to say, by the Michael Shellenberger, the author of Apocalypse Never and San Francisco. Now, Michael, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Since you wrote Apocalypse Never, which I believe was out at the very start of the lockdown madness, right?
That's right.
Do you think actually the debate, the conversation has advanced enough to actually bring about the conversations that you were seeking to have through real-world data and evidence?
There's been a huge change. I mean, I think we've seen here in Britain, the Prime Minister has recently walked back some of the commitments they wanted to make on the net zero, but the biggest change of all has been on nuclear power. We've seen Japan, South Korea, France all step up and make bigger commitments to nuclear, and also on natural gas. I think that what we saw with the campaigns against oil and gas extraction, we saw the impacts of that in terms of the energy crisis. Coal came back in a big way, both last year and this year. There's no need for coal. There's no need for any solid fuels. We have abundant natural gas, which is, in terms of carbon emissions, twice as clean. And so I think both on those two issues, gas and nuclear, we've seen a significant change over the last 3 years.
And do you think actually the national security arguments have been brought to the fore because of the war in Ukraine, of course? The pipeline that was built with Russia is no more.
That's right.
Connecting Europe to Russia. Do you actually think that that has brought into focus some realism into the debate?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, many of us were critical of the Nord Stream pipeline from Russia to Western Europe. We thought that was a huge mistake. You may know President Trump was lambasted for criticizing that pipeline. His criticisms proved to be spot on. There was a huge crisis there trying to figure out how to power Europe. It lucked out last year with an unseasonably warm winter.
Yes.
That helped quite a bit. And you see a significant ramping up of LNG, liquefied natural gas production worldwide, the shipping of it globally. I think that's a great thing. In general, gas is cheaper when it's piped than when it has to be frozen or cooled so it becomes liquid, put on ships and then shipped around the world. But nonetheless, it's just such a significantly better fuel than coal. It's hard not to see this as part of a broader transition away from solid fuels.
And do you think Britain is the canary in the coal mine? Because we put in place, of course, net zero by 2050 into law, and that was back in 2019.
That's right.
Now, that conversation has rolled back ever so slightly, where Rishi Sunak, as you mentioned, has rolled back on some of the pledges that were made, where coerced essentially to ban all petrol and diesel cars, new sales of petrol and diesel cars. Now they're saying, hang on a minute, we can't do it that fast, let's do it in a proportionate and measured way. Do you think other countries will be looking at Britain and saying, well, we're a world leader, but perhaps not in the way Greta Thunberg intended us to be?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that people will recognize that while we've seen some promising developments in terms of electric vehicles, we remain an oil-powered economy. Oil remains the dominant fuel for transportation and will be for decades to come. And there's no reason for us to be stifling production. I always point out that, we never run out of the incumbent fuel. We didn't run out of wood before we moved to coal and oil. We didn't run out of coal to move to natural gas. The new technology becomes much cheaper. The new fuel becomes much cheaper. Britain doesn't have a lot of options. You've already done almost all the wind you can do. Now you've really maxed out your wind. This is a terrible country, as everybody knows, to do solar. So you're really left with gas and nuclear as your main two technologies or fuels to power the economy. Energy prices are the one thing that we actually can control. You can make energy more abundant to bring down prices. I think that needs to be a big part of both Labour and Conservative Party platforms going forward.
Well, Michael, if only we could bottle the hot air coming out of green politicians, then I think we'd all be warm for the next century. But I want to turn to San Francisco because you wrote, and it's actually, if you don't mind me saying, it's quite a depressing read. And I mean that in the sense of you have your eyes opened to just what's going on and the way in which progressive politics, and I use that in quotation marks because I don't think there's anything especially progressive about taking us back to a lawless hellhole, which is what I think many Democrat states have sadly turned into. And I only see this through pictures online, but it's a very depressing state of affairs, fentanyl addictions and all the rest of it. I wondered, did you feel tinge of depression when you saw the displays in London over the past few weeks in response to the October 7 Israeli massacre by Hamas? and the way in which there has just been an outcry of support for who I would deem to be terrorist groups that want to take us back in time to, I'm not talking the last century, I'm talking taking us back to the dark
last
ages.
millennium.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you recognize that politics going around not just America, but other countries around the West as well?
Well, I came from the radical left. I came from the left as a young man. The left achieved much of what it wanted to achieve. It achieved equal rights for same-sex couples. It achieved a huge agenda on climate change. Massive amounts of money are being spent on renewables. It's really run out of an agenda, and it's become quite nihilistic. You see it in groups like Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil, where they're really turning against the pillars of civilization, of which there's just really fundamentally three: cheap energy, law and order, meritocracy. If you want liberal democracy, then you need equal justice under the law, free speech, and free trade. All 6 of those pillars are under attack by the radical left. The reaction from the radical left to the Hamas attacks was absolutely appalling, and we have been condemning and trying to understand where it comes from. This is a moment that requires reminding ourselves and understanding the pain on all sides of that situation. Look, everybody has failed. It's been a massive failure to get to some kind of a solution in the Middle East. So really there's blood on everybody's hands. But to see the sort of support for the Hamas attacks, it's really quite shocking for us in the United States. The Muslims in the United States, the Arabs in the United States, people that I know and I'm friends with are much more moderate, do not engage in that kind of behaviors. So it's really quite shocking. And I think it's a wake-up call. We should all recognize how special Western civilization is with this sort of equal justice under the law, with rules, rule of law and democracy. I think it's a reminder of how special it is what we have here. We need to protect it. It should be expanded around the world rather than we should not be importing those really dark anti-civilization, nihilistic and anti-human values.
You were in London not too long ago this year, where you were discussing actually free speech in this country. Now, we've spoken before about Ofcom, and Ofcom are the regulators of this great august channel and other television channels in the United Kingdom. They're now going to regulate the internet. Now, do you think actually too much has been given away in the name of safety and security, and we've actually thrown out the very key tenets of freedom and, freedom from censorship?
Well, that's right. I mean, as an American, we're always shocked to see other countries, particular countries that we're so close with, like Great Britain, embracing censorship. We have the First Amendment of our Constitution protects free speech. And you may know, I interview people on the street and I ask them if they know that the American Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, upheld the right of neo-Nazis to march through a neighborhood not only of Jewish Americans, but of Holocaust survivors. Our commitment to free speech is so radical, it's so profound, that when we see these restrictions in Great Britain or in France, where they're talking about banning all Palestinian protests or banning the right to fly flags, our point is always the same, and it's the same lesson we learn over and over again. Let people express their hatred. Absolutely, let them express their noxious ideas, because it gives us a chance to counter those ideas, to explain why they're wrong. If you don't have free speech, then you don't have an opportunity to win the argument, to make the case for freedom, to make the case for equal justice under the law, and all of the other things that are so dear to us in the West. That's why you need free speech, is so that you can stamp out these bad ideas. If we don't let people speak, then there's no chance to overcome that kind of hatred. When people are allowed to do it, there's a chance for dialogue and debate, and I also think there's a chance to see that we're all human beings in the end, and we all should respect each other.
How do you think actually we've come to a point where we're talking about having to expose hatred on the streets of the capitals throughout the West, when actually we seem to have adopted a policy of mass migration for those who do not share our values, views, and all the rest of it? Yeah. It's a real problem. This idea of social cohesion, we've spoken about this at this conference. How do we actually ensure that people who do come to our nations actually, don't want to wipe us off the face of the earth, for example?
Yeah. Well, obviously we're going to have to be much more selective about how we do immigration. I think that the mass migration you've seen into Europe, and now we're seeing the same in the United States, our border is absolutely out of control. You need to have controlled migration. You need to select who's able to come in. I think that the key here is that we want to find people that are committed to our Western values who are coming in here. It's been the victimhood ideology is really at the root of letting people die on the street from drug overdose and of enabling the sort of behaviors that we've been seeing that are so self-destructive. The key is, not everybody's a victim. People are, in fact, or people pass through a stage of victimhood to achieve their own self. It's kind of a self-becoming. It's really the realization of your freedom and independence that has been at the heart. It's the story that's been at the heart of Western civilization. So I think we have to find people that are committed to that rather than committed to returning Europe back to the Dark Ages, millennia past. Same thing for the United States. We need to have a much more controlled approach to immigration going forward.
So, Michael, you've entered politics, right?
Entered and exited.
Election. Yeah. And saw the error of your ways. No. And I'm wondering, were you in the Oval Office right now, or were you in number 10 Downing Street? What would you want policymakers to actually take away from what you've heard over the past few days?
I mean, ultimately, politics is about leadership, and you have to have a vision and a set of values that align and that unite people. And I think that it's not that hard. You need to come back to these core pillars of liberal democratic civilization. You need to affirm the human spirit. We need a pro-human agenda. We talk so much about left and right, but what's missing is that what's essential to becoming a human is this process of overcoming adversity, overcoming oppression. In fact, that was the greatest story of the American Civil Rights Movement. The greatest song, I should say, was "We Shall Overcome." That's been lost in woke victimhood ideology. I think when you kind of can articulate a message like that, if I just take free speech as an example, it used to be a liberal issue.
Yeah.
It used to be a left-wing issue in the United States. It's now something that conservatives have embraced specifically for their own self-protection and self-defense. But when you take a strong stand for free speech, we find you get almost the entire right, political right in Western democracies, plus you still get a significant, maybe 25 or 50% of the left. That's the kind of majoritarian politics I think that we need to pursue, alongside defending all the other pillars of Western civilization and liberal democracy.
Well, I would say this to viewers, Michael, if I could clone you and put you everywhere, in every country across the West, I absolutely would.
Thank you,
I love
Darren.
hearing from you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.